The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, I have much more to tell you, but you cannot bear it now. But when he comes, the Spirit of truth, he will guide you in all truth. He will not speak on his own, but he will speak what he hears and will declare to you the things that are coming. He will glorify me because he will take from what is mine and declare it to you. Everything that the Father has is mine. For this reason I told you that he will take from what is mine and declare it to you. The Gospel of the Lord. Today is the feast of the Holy Trinity. And if you think that I am going to explain the mystery of the Holy Trinity to you, then you're badly mistaken. I will be celebrating my priesthood, 65 years as a priest, in 2 weeks' time. And in all, thank you. And in all those years, I have never met a priest who could explain to me the Holy Trinity. Not one of them. And despite what I read and so on, I know the great St. Thomas Aquinas, who is looked upon as the greatest theologian of the church, couldn't explain it. The great genius St. Augustine couldn't explain it. So how do you think I'm going to explain it? But when I think about the Holy Trinity, there's one word that always comes to mind, and that is the word relationship. Relationship. And when I think of being in relationship, I realize that we are at our best when we are in relationship, and we're at our worst when we are out of relationships. I happened to be in Washington a couple of weeks ago with the fathers from our religious congregation. And visiting the Capitol, I noticed there was a huge statue there of General Grant on his horse, of course. But I also remember something else about him, that he was a serious alcoholic. And then I walked down Pennsylvania Avenue to the other end, south side of the Capitol. And I noticed that there was a park there. And the name of the park was called John Rollins. Who was John Rollins? John Rollins was one of Grant's best friends. And whenever he fell off the wagon, John Rollins was always there to pick him up and put him back on his horse. And ultimately, John Rollins explained to General Grant that it was important that he get back on that horse because of all the soldiers and men who depended on him. Of course. So that was a beautiful relationship between General Grant and John Rollins. And that's why at the end of the Pennsylvania Avenue, you have Grant on his horse, and you have a park named after his best friend. Not so very far away from here, there is a park. I think it's on Pines, not sure. It's called Brian Piccolo. Sorry? Oh, it's on Sheridan, okay. I mean, I've passed it several times, but. So, who was Brian Piccolo? Well, I suppose those of you who are football fans know that he didn't play for the Miami Dolphins. He played for, of course, the Chicago Bears. And while he was there, there was another great football player called Gale Sayers. Now, one was a black man and the other one was white. And for the first time in American sports, these two men roomed together. The very first two men who roomed together. And of course, you could imagine what it was like 40 years ago with reporters asking them all kinds of questions about rooming together, the relationship, any problem, the usual kind of stuff that reporters kind of you deal with. And then Brian Piccolo took seriously ill with cancer. And unfortunately, he was unable to play in the playoffs. Chicago, of course, went on to win. Piccolo died. And Gale Sayers won the most valuable player. I think it was called the George C. Halas Award because Halas was the owner of the Chicago Bears at the time. And so there was a big celebration and a big banquet. And during the banquet, Gale Sayers was presented with the most valuable player. And this is what he said. "You flatter me by giving me this reward. But I tell you here and now that I accept it for Brian Piccolo. He is the man of courage who should receive the GS Award. I love Brian Piccolo. I love Brian Piccolo. And I'd like you to love him too. Tonight, when you hit your knees, please ask God to love him too." Relationship. Gale Sayers was at his best when he was in relationship with his friend, Brian Piccolo. And the same is true of all of us. We are at our best when our mothers hugged us, when our husbands kissed us, when a teacher took an interest in us or encouraged us, or the bishop affirmed us, or the pastor affirmed us. We are at our best in those moments. And we are at our worst when we are right out of our relationship. Do you ever think how we punish somebody, how we punish people? The worst punishment in the world that we can administer to another person, when we put a person in solitary confinement. That is the worst punishment. Isolated from family and friend and everybody else. That's how we punish people. Put them in solitary confinement. Or you talk to somebody who's going through a serious divorce, out of relationship. You can imagine how painful that is. I read recently that the worst pain that children experience is they watch their parents going through a divorce. That's what I read. And I kind of agree with that. I really do. And so, this evening, the Holy Spirit, the Father and the Son, they are in relationship. How they are, we don't know, but we know they are in relationship. This morning, for example, 28 teenagers and I think it was 8 adults were confirmed. They received the third person of the Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit that will give them the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, wisdom and knowledge and fortitude and so on. And that Spirit will be with them for the rest of their life. They took the Spirit out of this church, and it will remain with them until they give their last breath. And the Holy Spirit will be with them to guide them, to protect them, to inspire them. Notice that little word, inspire, made up of two words, in and spirit, to be inspirited, to be inspired. And we all know that word because we see demonstrations of inspiration from time to time. Whether you're talking about baseball or football or music, people who are inspirited, inspired. In other words, they are functioning at a level above the normal. We'll say to somebody, he was inspired. Or we'll use another word sometimes, which is interesting. He was on fire. She was on fire. And you remember on that first Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles, there were tongues of fire. And that's what the word, where the word comes from. She was on fire. And so, the Holy Spirit is critically important in your life and my life. And it's my feeling that of all the saints and what have you, the most ignored is the Holy Spirit. Despite the fact that the Holy Spirit is in me this evening, the very same Spirit that descended upon the apostles on that very first Pentecost. Everything in life is achieved through the Holy Spirit. Did you ever say to yourself, I don't know what got into me. I don't know how I managed to do that. Have you said that? I bet you have. Well, you know the answer now, don't you? It was the Holy Spirit. Many times when I'm driving on 595, or indeed on University, and I have escaped accidents just like that. You think the Holy Spirit was somewhere around? Of course. The Holy Spirit is active in all our lives. And that is why every day of our lives we should turn to the Holy Spirit dwelling within us.